Gertrude Bell had many accomplishments. A polyglot, she translated 43 Persian poems from the collection The Divan of Hafiz into English. She published her translations in June of 1897, alongside a study of the poems in context of Islamic Persia's history. Much of her life leading up to 1914 was spent on archaeological digs with a focus on Byzantine architecture in Turkey and the palace at Uqaydir in what is now Iraq. The chronicles of her travels brought her recognition. These experiences were deemed useful during World War I, when she worked as an interpreter for the British in Egypt and mapped wells and paths in Arabia. Her contemporary, T.E. Lawrence, later acknowledged that her information had aided the Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire during the war. After the war, she championed Faisal, a key figure during the Arab revolt, as the first king of Iraq. For the remainder of her life, Faisal helped her establish the Iraq Museum to protect the country's past. Perhaps less discussed, however, is her accomplished career as a mountaineer, specifically her 1902 crossing of the Lauterehrorn-Schreckhorn Traverse. As a daughter of the sixth richest family in Britain, Gertrude had the privilege of traveling extensively, including 2 world tours, one with her brother Maurice and another with her half-brother Hugh, who is sometimes referred to as Hugo. Gertrude showed an interest in mountain climbing when her family visited the Dauphiné region of the French Alps in August of 1897. It was during that trip that she climbed minor peaks like Pic de la Gras and the Bec de l'Homme. Gertrude returned to the region in August of 1899 to climb the larger La Meige and Barre des Écrins. Early in her visit, she encountered German mountaineer Helene Kuntz, who had just completed a climb of La Meige's summit peak before her. Gertrude's expedition, however, would cross the complete traverse. This is considered Gertrude's first climbing season. For the 1900 climbing season, Gertrude went to the Chamonix commune in France. It was there that she enlisted Ulrich Führer as one of her guides. Ulrich and his younger brother Heinrich would become her usual guides during the 1901, 1902, and 1904, which was her last, seasons. In 1900, she climbed Mont Blanc, the Grey Pont, and the Grand Duru. In 1901, Gertrude came face to face with the Schreckhorn in Switzerland. After reaching the top via the southeast, which is the side she referred to as seen from the Grimsel Pass, she focused on the Engelhörner range, where she achieved 7 first ascents, 3 more ascents of old peaks or saddles, and the first traverse of the Orbachtaler Engelhorn. One of the 7 virgin peaks was named after her, Gertrudespitze, or Gertrude's Peak. Her attention then turned to the unclimbed northeast face of the Finsteraarhorn and the uncompleted traverse of the Lauterehrorn and Schreckhorn. However, she was met with bad weather and returned to England unsuccessful. At the end of the year, Gertrude wrote the article Concerning Mountains, Die Engelhörner, for the National Review. Her description of Switzerland is worth quoting in detail. You need not go farther afield than the much-trodden Bernese Oberland to find new peaks and new adventures. It is unnecessary to go farther in search of Alpine beauties, for in no region of mountains is there a greater variety of gorgeous scenery. Snowfield and rock would seem here to put on their finest aspects. A master hand hollowed out the thin shell-like ridge of the Schreckhorn and raised the pinnacle of the Finsteraarhorn, spread the white carpet of the Lech Glacier, and planted pine and willow gentian down the eastern slopes of the great Cited. No wonder, but great cause for thankfulness, that to the pioneers of Alpine adventure, the Oberland was one vast magnet, drawing them irresistibly upwards. Despite her success, this article was the only time that she publicly wrote about her climbs. This tells us that she did not set out on these mountain expeditions for glory. Seeking adventure was simply how she lived her life. Gertrude returned to Switzerland in 1902. She got a glimpse of fame while on the Brunig railway line when a conductor asked her if she was the Miss Bell who had climbed the Engelhörner. At Rosenlaue, she once again encountered Helene Kuntz, who had recently completed several Engelhörner first ascents with Ulrich as her guide. Ulrich had rejoined Gertrude the previous day, to which she felt was Helene's displeasure. A couple of days later, Helene climbed the Big Gendarme, on the Vorder Wellhorn. Gertrude woke up at midnight to attempt the same climb with a 1 a.m. start. She was halted by a storm half an hour later and took shelter in a deserted chalet, choosing one that did not have pigs in it. More rain at dawn led to her returning to her inn at 5 a.m., but she was still determined. The next day, Gertrude started for the big Gandharma at 9:50 a.m. She made it to the top by 1 p.m. Using a sling left by Helene's guide, a German named Gustav Hasler, she led herself down the southeast corner. It was not long before Gertrude took her ambitions a step further. The very next morning, she returned to the Vorder Wellhorn and, while making a 5-minute halt to undo her rope, viewed a chamois run up the arete above her, knocking down stones as it climbed. Gertrude described the Wellhorn arete as one of 4 impossibles of the Oberland. She ascended it that day. Her expedition ended by crossing the Rosenlaui Glacier under the Seracs. 2 days later, while crossing the couloir between King's Peak and the Princess, she wore climbing shoes for the first time. A few days after conquering the Vorder Wellhorn, Gertrude left Rosenlaui for the Grimsel Pass to tackle her next impossible. She wrote to her father describing plans for a midnight climb of the arete between the Lauterhorn and the Schreckhorn on an unclimbed side. These were secret plans because there were assumptions that Helene was focused on the same expedition from the other side. Thunderstorms pushed Gertrude's climb to a 3 a.m. start. After walking up the glacier for 3 hours, the sun rose, and Gertrude noticed the light shine on the Finsteraarhorn. She reached the bottom of the Lauterhorn arete around 9 a.m. Climbing through mist and then snowfall, she reached the top around 2:15 p.m. She, Ulrich, and Heinrich put their visiting cards in a bottle that they found there. In another letter to her father, Gertrude wrote that it was all to be done again. However, she noted that all agreed not to climb the Lauterhorn from the Grimsel side again. She described the arete to the summit as made by the devil and one of his happiest inspirations. The Gandharmas and snow cornices made it feel as though they were never getting any closer to the end. Instead, they would attempt it from the Grindelwald side. 1 week later, Gertrude set off for the Lauterhorn again. She woke up at 10:20 p.m. and set off at 11:10 p.m. Helene went to the Schreckhorn saddle. Gertrude followed the glacier toward the Strahlege on the southwest ridge of the Lauterhorn. Once again, she noticed the Finsteraarhorn, this time shining in the moonlight. She put out her lantern to take in its full brilliance. Just before 2 a.m., she made it to the Strahlege and faced wind coming from the Schreckfern Bergschrund on the southwest ridge of the Schreckhorn. On the way up the arete toward the summit, she felt a bitter wind whenever she turned toward the Schreckfern side. She made it to the top of the arete at 4:10 a.m. and watched the dawn come while she ate breakfast. The Matterhorn now received her admiration in the pink sky. Now traversing across the mountain, Gertrude reached the saddle at 6:35 a.m. The wind was cruel. Ulrich half suggested not going to the top of the Lauterhorn, but Gertrude insisted. Onto the Gandharmas they went, reaching the summit at 8:50 a.m. After a second breakfast, she returned to the saddle. She then went up a tall Gandharma and waited for Helene at the top, who joined her at 10:45 a.m. Together, they reached the top of a smooth arete at 11:35 a.m. From then on, there was a sharp arete, hard Gandharma, and a Gandharma with an overhang. Ulrich unrolled a thin rope for them to go up the overhang above a 25 to 30 foot drop. After Gertrude went up, she climbed to the top of a smooth face. Helene did not follow up the overhang. Instead, she went around the bottom and up the other side of the Gandharma. She then followed the ordinary route back down the Lauterhorn and over the Strahlege. Gertrude, however, made her descent to the saddle, reaching it at 2 p.m., and back across the glacier at 4:30 p.m. She reached a community-use hut at 5:30 p.m., just before Helene. Both teams slept in the hut that night, and Gertrude complained about Helene rolling onto her all night. The next morning, Gertrude returned to the Grindelwald at 10 a.m. This was the first crossing of the Lauterhorn-Schreckhorn traverse and, according to the Alpine Journal, her most important climb. Gertrude's attention returned to the unclimbed northeast face of the Finsteraarhorn. It is unclear in her letters if her second impossible was the Lauterhorn-Schreckhorn Traverse or the Finsteraarhorn. However, the Finsteraarhorn would prove impossible for her. A storm, inability to light matches, shelterless glacier, facing unknown ground, and eventual frostbite would cause her to turn back 57 hours into the expedition. Gustav Hasler called this the first real attempt of the northeast face, and a most gallant and determined attack on it. He praised her endurance and performance. Gustav and his friend Fritz Amater successfully climbed what Gertrude could not in 1904, grabbing a rope ring left by Gertrude at her turning point as a souvenir. In 1903, Gertrude spent some time climbing in Vancouver while on her world tour with Howell. Her final climb was the Matterhorn the following year. The remaining two impossibles of the Oberland were the Jungfrau from the Jungfraujoch saddle, first traversed in descent by C.F. Meade, guided by Ulrich and Heinrich in 1903, and the northeast arete of the Eiger, first ascended by Hugo Macchi, guided by Fritz Amater in 1921.